And welcome to Beyond the Pixel Episode 6. I'm technical designer Luis Fernando Sandrin, and joining me as always, digital artist Ken Ha.
Yo, what's up?
I'm doing good. I just sliced through that intro just like a Shadow Warrior.
like a Shadow Warrior. Oh,
also
man.
sliced through my finger, but you know, whatever.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, straight up. Like
it
before this, when I was
cooking?
making food, just cut my finger.
Oh, I did that once, like trying to cut tomatoes, and I actually almost passed out.
Really?
Like, I was shocked. I think it was just shocked because I was like, I almost cut through half of my finger.
Oh,
and then
crap.
I stopped, and then once I started the blood, I think I was younger, and then I didn't realize, but I guess I get squeamish if I see my own blood. So I was like sitting down, and I had to like steady myself because the world got super wobbly for a second.
Oh no, that sounds rough.
Yeah.
I've had that happen to me when I banged my elbow once really hard on the wall, and like it swelled up like an egg. and I was living with my parents at the time. This was a while ago.
Yeah.
And I came to my mother. I'm like, I think I'm gonna faint here, right? You know, and she was like, okay, you're gonna sit down on this couch. And then she made coffee and then gave me coffee. I was like, here, have this coffee. I'm like, I can't have coffee. Why are you giving me coffee? Like, no, it'll make you feel better. I'm like, okay. Didn't pass out, but it was close. That was the worst bruise I ever got.
Man,
Speaking about violent acts,
bad violent experiences. Yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk about our first subject of the day.
Yeah, what we got lined up. We're gonna go through the Devolver Conference. Few games announced there, big games, indie games. You want to go through all of them, so we're gonna go through all of them. Afterwards, don't really too interested in talking about Uplay Forward, but there's some games there that have some concepts I want to talk about, namely cyber aesthetics. I'm interested in hearing what is your thought on that, and how that's usually symbolism of rebellion and you know, taking it to the man and like breaking down barriers and putting power back in the people. But they're used by really big, huge corporations themselves who would kind of be the opponents to this sort of ideology. So I'm interested in how the art side of that influences as a creative for you.
It's kind of ironic, a little ironic, I guess.
And then I want to spend some time talking about open world games and open world design, since there's a lot of those that are going to be happening now and forever in the future.
Like Assassin's Creed just got announced.
Assassin's Creed, Watch Dogs,
Watch Dogs,
Cyberpunk, and Far Cry 6 as well.
Oh yeah,
going
that's
forward.
right.
All of these are open world games. They have always been here. They have changed in some ways, they have not in other ways, and I want to talk about that, and personally what I feel is important in an open world game. So, you know, once again, an opportunity for me to talk a lot about emotions and game design.
I have some opinions about open world games too, but
excellent.
So I'm looking forward to getting into that a little bit later.
Excellent. But first off.
So let's get into Devolver, because I was talking to you about this earlier, and I was saying how I really don't know how to feel about this. This whole Devolver Digital Direct they did. I guess to summarize it at first, Devolver Digital, they're a publisher, right? Or are they also they're a publisher? Yeah, okay. So
they're primarily a publisher. I don't think they have a number of developers that work with them. I do not think they develop their own games.
Yeah, I think each of the games that were at least announced in this direct have their own little studios, whether or not they work super closely with Devolver themselves.
Yeah.
But
a Crow team might be owned by them.
Yeah, maybe. Anyways, that's just to say that they have a history of doing quite unconventional conferences, which this is the tough part for me, is that there are some things that I do love about the whole digital direct that they did, and then there's some things that I didn't. So to summarize the whole thing, it essentially was a parody on the whole E3 hypeness. So there's a lot, if you go to like the next frame, there's a lot of imagery and skits about a kind of megalomaniac marketing team that's bound, kind of like a superhero parody vibe, in that the marketing teams in games are just trying to create hype, and it's a hype machine. And so their whole direct was a play on that, in terms of I guess it's a bit hard to describe in that way because it's a fake hype direct in which they announce real games that they have been working on, or the studios have been working on. And so the things I liked about it, the things I don't like about it. So I was conflicted because my initial gut reaction was I really I was really turned off, and I still kind of am turned off. But what was your opinion? Did you hear anything about this?
I haven't seen these press conferences. I've just seen like clips of them, even way back when they were like making like film reels out of like people's heads and brains, like very 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 blood focused.
Yeah. Super gory,
which makes sense for the body of games they usually put out when you consider Serious Sam and Shadow Warrior and I feel like the cheesy aspect of it kind of like lends it to sort of the humor that the games they choose to publish sort of represent.
They have a very
it's schlocky,
borderline,
you know? It's schlocky.
Borderline aspect. Like a bit of a tongue-in-cheek humor to it. So there's a couple of things about the Devolver Direct. So the whole thing is that they're parodying the idea that companies these days are putting so much money and effort into making their like games look really hype. And we talked about this the last time we did that Sony conference. I was saying how so many studios took themselves way too seriously and try to make like a really epic seeming trailer, even though the content they were showing doesn't match the scale. So it's like having Lord of the Rings music while you're watching SpongeBob. You know, it doesn't match up exactly. Like, oh yeah, the music's great, but that's not the problem that we're facing. And that's so like I like the idea that they're really gonna have fun with it. My problem is that it's ironic that they were making fun of like hype marketing videos that like are trying to overshadow the games that they actually play. And then they try to make a viral video that essentially takes over all of the occupation of what like you're supposed to be thinking about during this direct, which is the games, and it switches it over to the marketing side of it, which is this video that they made. And my first problem is, okay, so I'm a big film person. Like I like films. I'm a big cinematographer, like cinematographic. I don't know. Cinemaphile. I also love comedy, and it hurts me that I think that this doesn't make a good comedy or a good movie or a good skit. Like it was just very like B level the entire way.
Schlocky.
And it was schlocky, but the problem is they're trying to make a like C level parody. Like it's so bad. Like Red Alert cutscene levels we're talking about here, where like the actors are practically porn star actors trying to act in a game. But this is like their execution was not terrible, but the writing wasn't very on point for me.
You feel like it wasn't earnest potentially?
I think it was very earnest, but the problem is that I also think they were kind of full of themselves in terms of how much effort, how much importance you think that I care about your marketing efforts are versus what I care about is your actual games. Do you know what I mean? It's like saying, like,
do you feel some of it is deserved though?
Like deserved
considering
as in,
how successful they have had in the past.
Well, I would say that it makes sense to me that they would try something like this, and I like that they tried something like this. But I still think they've gone too far, and to the point where it's like, if I was I am a Devolver Digital fan. I love the Serious Sam franchises, and we'll talk about the games specifically after this. But I like the games that they announced. But the whole direct, if you go to that video, it's 2 hours long. It's 2 hours long.
And there's 4 games on this list here.
There's 4 games on this list, and
5.
They spread one premise, the idea that you were gonna be like this fake hype marketing kind of joking kind of machine, us versus the man versus machine kind of thing. But they spread this one premise over like 10 bits. Right? Like, so if I'm a fan of comedy, if you're here for a stand-up, which is how they kind of like presented it, it was very much one person on screen or another person they're talking to. You can go to the next frame if you want to get an idea of what we're talking about. Like, these kind of things in a movie, if you want to have this frame, you want to have two people talking, and that's all you're going to show for like a 10-minute part of the movie, these people need to be giving speeches that are written by gods, because it's so boring to shoot a film like this. No one would have shoot a film like this.
Was it like this for 10 minutes?
They pretty much go like this frame back and forth between a single person cut and and like a dual frame cut maybe. They're and very loose props. So like I'm not here to criticize this on a movie level, right? Because obviously this is a freaking direct, right? But my problem is that you expect us to be captivated for movie lengths, but you don't respect the medium that you're. Well, they didn't respect the medium in terms of the execution and time frame that you're talking about, like that we were kind of put through, because I wanted to know about the games, but I didn't want to sit through a live event, which is like 45 minutes of these skits before I get a commercial, which was the actual trailer. The commercials in between the events, these skits were the trailers. So yeah, I guess it's in a way ironic, and maybe that's part of what they were trying to do, is spoof the idea that, you know, the whole thing is an ad and the ad is not supposed to be great or something like that. But that's all I wanted to see, is I wanted to see the trailers. And if you were to Google right now the digital direct, like you have to get websites that will cut through the video for you and tell you what it is that they were trying to announce, because there's so many people. My whole thing is that I think that they ended up hurting themselves more than they helped themselves. I'm not sure what the production value for the whole thing is, but a 2-hour long video, it is a pretty long and expensive process, I would imagine. And to me, it's like, it seems like it wasn't really worth it, because I don't see the hype that was generated by it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't have the statistics, but to me,
I see mostly positive on it.
Well, I think that the games that they announced were actually, like, for the most part, pretty strong games. But like I said, maybe it's just me. Maybe it just rubbed me the wrong way. But I personally don't want to see. I'm already bored out of my mind at most of these directs that any company gives. Like, besides the games that they're announcing, I think Nintendo does it actually the best. They show a lot of trailers. They have a little speech of, you know, the developers, and then they show gameplay, and they run it through pretty quickly.
And they're 26 minutes long, like at max, right?
Yeah, they're very short, because they do them quite
26,
often.
45,
right? Yeah. Versus like how many cringe fest conference announcents have we seen in our lifetime? There's so many. There's so many, right? So I guess, like, if we're talking about if I'm stacking this up against all of the cringiest ones, like, this one, yes, it's not as cringy, but it is just as boring to me, because you're making me wait just as long. And I sent you a video earlier, and this is maybe the reason why.
Yeah, the cruise liner video.
Yeah, there was this video. I was on a cruise recently, and then they wanted to show us a video of, like, how to perform safety measures on the cruise and where to go in cases of emergency. But they stretched this instruction video, which could have been like a minute long, into like a 10-minute fake James Bond thing, where we had to, like, follow the plot for a bit so that we knew what, like, you had to follow the plot to understand the safety rules. And while they were showing this plot, they would keep complimenting themselves. Like, they would talk about, and then the spy just has to break into the 5-star bedroom that has complimentary, like, drinks and, like, refrigerators and stuff. Like, oh my god, this is so, like, annoying that you can't just, like, give me the information I want in a fast way. You have to, you feel the need that, like, you need to dress it up for some reason.
Yeah.
And the whole medium and the message becomes, like, the medium becomes more important than the message. That's what really annoys me about the Devolver Direct, was that, you know, maybe it's in my own head, but I see a team of marketers who had this massive budget they were supposed to blow on E3 but couldn't, or whatever it is, in the conference, and said, how can we make the games or this announcement as special as possible? But because they're marketers, they just do what they know how to do, which is put a marketing video together. But I think that really misses the point of marketing, in which you're supposed to showcase your product to the best, in the best light. But, you know, it shouldn't be about the marketing. It should be about your product, right? So that's what.
I have a devil's advocate argument against this.
Please.
If you can humor me.
Yeah, please.
Because you know about Devolver Digital, I know about Devolver Digital, but how many Devolver Digital level publishers do you know about? Like Team 17, Versus Evil, Those are the ones at the top of my head that I can think about.
Yeah, I know very little.
I can't
not gonna lie.
name like Tiny Build as well.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of the level of publisher. I can name a few games from those. Like Tiny Build is because their icon uses the No Time to Explain guy. Like I know like they started with No Time to Explain and then they went on to publish a bunch of other games. But I really can't think of I can't think of it at the top of my head. But I think Devolver Digital. I can tell you Shadow Warrior. I can tell you Serious Sam. I can tell you Westerado, Double Barreled, Duck Game, right? And
is your insight that like it at least helps them get their studios like better known?
Yeah, for better or for worse. Even though I haven't, see, for me it's weird because I haven't seen these videos.
Yeah.
But they must have a good enough marketing team that I know a Devolver game like when it's announced, right? And when I see Devolver appear at the end of at the beginning of a game, I know like, oh, okay, this is going to be this sort of game. It's going to be weird. It's going to have like an interesting art style. It's maybe going to be a little bit stripped back and focused, you know?
I would almost argue that it did the opposite, and it put more emphasis on the Devolver brand name more so than it did on any of the individual studios. Even though they highlight, I don't know if it was actually real, because the whole problem with giving sarcastic studio fake interviews and stuff like that is that I didn't know if some of the studios that I don't know were actually real studios, because they cut to some real looking like people, but I don't know these studios in the first place, and you directly cut from making fun of a bunch of fake studios to now like to a real one, so I wasn't really sure. And all I can think of is that this whole production, I wish that they would have spent the money to put it into a good trailer for those games that they announced, because the trailers that they showed, I think, were actually quite weak. Just in terms of a trailer standpoint, they weren't able to show a lot of gameplay. They weren't able to show a lot of features. Most of the stuff that we saw, we have to guess as to how the game plays until afterwards. But let's just get into the first game, and then maybe we'll be able to suss it out a little bit more. So the first game is Shadow Warriors. Have you played Shadow Warrior 1 and 2?
I've played Shadow Warrior 1, not enough to finish it, which I don't understand why, because I really like that game.
I didn't play the first one, so I'm going off of purely the trailer for Shadow Warrior 3. Has it always been a kind of Serious Sam-like type game?
Yep. Even original Shadow Warrior, way back in the day, the 2D one, was sort of a Doom-esque, fast-paced Duke Nukem attitude, a lot of dick jokes, but with like a Western interpretation of what a ninja would be.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. The ninja fantasy that the Western side is taking to.
Yeah. So it was definitely, and the revival of it, the one that where the genesis of Shadow Warrior 1, 2, and 3 was a first person shooter and sword fighter melee game, but it had a lot more going on under the hood. For example, there was different special abilities you could get with your katana by doing almost Street Fighter like input on your keyboard. Yeah. You can make whirlwind
was that
slashes.
Katana Zero?
Was
that Katana Zero?
What
game are you talking about right now?
No, Shadow Warrior 1.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, my mistake.
We can talk about Katana Zero another day. That game is fantastic.
People thought that was going to be announced early on.
Katana Zero 2?
Yeah, they were saying. Well, they were hoping.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Back to your point. So for Shadow Warrior, did you like Shadow Warrior 1? You said you did.
Like
right?
I said, I got to maybe halfway through the game, and I was really enjoying it. But it's the kind of game that also gets kind of hard, and is also extremely long. So I think I just lost the train of it somewhere along that point, and then I ended up buying it again on PlayStation 4, and I started playing it on there because I had a weaker computer, and it looked nicer on PS4. Can you believe that? This was how long ago this was.
Just a testament how weak your computer was.
Yeah. I had a very weak computer. I was playing Shadow Warrior 1 on my PC at work because it was better than my PC at home.
If you go to the next slide, there's some gameplay shots of it. So a little bit of gameplay chat. So the gameplay element seems like they've really stuck with the whole, I guess, gruesome shooter little bit to it. So the whole thing I kept thinking for the two first-person shooter games that were announced, which is Shadow Warriors 3 and Serious Sam 4. I just kept thinking is that you guys are behind the 8 ball after Doom Eternal. Like, Doom Eternal has such a high watermark for this type of action game because I think it's a very similar type of action game, right? Like almost like an arena shooter deathmatch, but single player style, right? With kind of over the top gore and very arcadey like action. But man, Doom Eternal was so good, and it added so many mechanics that were built off of the 2016
Doom. Yeah.
Doom. Like, I wanted to know. I think that the Shadow Warriors 3 and Serious Sam 4 maybe aren't going to be able to keep up, at least with the gameplay footage that I saw. Did you see the Shadow Warriors 3 gameplay footage at all?
I did.
Okay. So what did you think?
It's hard to tell. I'm going off my experience with the first game, and like I said, I really want to go back and play that because I did feel it was smarter than it lets itself onto, because you have 3 different systems for how you manage your, I think it's your ki that they use. That seems like something.
So your mana, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To have like powers that can push enemies away. You have your sword abilities, which are the Street Fighter like combos that you can put in.
Yeah.
And then all your guns have different upgrades and different alt fires and use different ammunition. So it has that sort of juggling systems that Doom 2016 would have.
Yeah.
Not juggling like physically juggling, but juggling as in your abilities, what you're doing at any given time.
Yeah.
Even before Doom 2016 came around. Doom 2016 made it sort of a cycle with how it works with your health. But I think the elevation of arena combat shooters sort of began with Shadow Warrior. I don't think that's too bold of a claim.
Well, it did seem like they made some innovations because, like, Doom after Doom 2 was quite quiet for a very long time, and even Doom 2 wasn't that
Doom
much
3.
of an advance. No, I'm talking about Doom 2. Of like even like if you think way back, the early shoot.
I
Doom
see what
1,
you mean.
right, and then Doom 2 came out, which was an advancement more in levels than it was an advancement in gameplay because the gameplay was almost
Super
exactly the same
shotgun.
as Doom 1. Different shotgun, right?
Cannot forget about the super shotgun.
But then it wasn't around for a while, and then games like Shadow Warriors and Quake too, like they kind of evolved that kind of genre, and then Doom didn't really step back into that genre until Doom 2016, right? With Doom 3 being more of a horror style game. So it does seem like Shadow Warriors had its place in the stepping stone of developing the arena type shooter. My main concern about Shadow Warriors is that I didn't see very many movement options besides one grappling hook kind of technique that they did. And then that seems to me to be one of the biggest evolutions in most FPSs nowadays, is that they've all learned to incorporate movement options because they realize movement can be a lot more interesting and fun. Right? So I was a bit worried about that, but the way that the monsters that were being shown, it did seem like a more puzzly than, say, Serious Sam, which is just waves and waves of monsters.
There's a puzzle to Serious Sam. We can talk about that later.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, I meant like monster puzzles, as in like, you know, when you play Doom Eternal and you get certain combinations of monsters that spawn, you have to kind of deal with them in a very specific way, and you have like a priority of what to kill first, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I kind of possibly see. In the trailer, they really had only a few instances of something that was kind of unique, which was the spinning blade kind of death or like environmental hazards, which seem to be interactable with a kind of rope shot that you have. But and this is my problem. I wish that they would have spent all that trailer time and you know, audience time on the game, because I want to know what are the mechanics of this game. Do they have mechanics to show off, right? Like, or is this just another elaborate cover up for like, you know, what marketing's always done is if you don't have gameplay and it's not ready yet, you can just make a cinematic for someone, right?
This is due out in 2021 though, right?
Yeah, like it's a bit far away. Yeah. So that's probably
I can definitely see them building up, because again, I need to play Shadow Warrior 2. I don't know how they built on that systems, but they are very well rated.
Yeah.
And based on my experience with Shadow Warrior 1, you're right. There wasn't a lot of movement options there. You at most had like a one of these, like a sidestep, a little dodge.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nothing in terms of grappling hooks. So I feel them including it is likely an indication that there's a move into that sort of direction. But again, without them straight up telling us, maybe it's written in an article somewhere. There's a lot of these games that they put out an article that describes a lot of the gameplay that is just not shown or only hinted at in the trailers.
Yeah.
So there might be more info there to glean.
One thing I like about Devolver is that they do seem like a studio that handles other studios well in terms of, or publisher, that handles studios well in terms of the feedback, because like the games that are coming out of their studios are very, I guess I would say non-run-of-the-mill games, and you need to have like a good relationship with a publisher for that to happen. I think publishers tend to push towards, more lowest common denominator type projects. But then, this is all just to say, I want more time on their games though, because all the questions that we're asking, like it seems like I just want to know more about that or nothing, right? Rather than. Because like right now, like we have to look through articles to even find information about these games, because it's very difficult to sift through like a plus 2 hour video to get where like 5% of it is actually information on the games.
You watched the conference. I just want to make sure on this. Did they also talk about Spiritfarer? Is that them?
Spiritfarer, I don't recall hearing them. I might have missed it because sometimes the conference jumped in and out, and I had to wait for. So essentially, I wasn't able to watch the full 2 hour conference. But yeah, I don't remember. I looked up afterwards to see if any of all the games that were announced, and I didn't see that game.
Never mind. Sorry. It's that's
okay.
more of a that's not Devolver related at all. Never mind.
Okay.
I just thought it was. My bad.
The next game they announced is Fall Guys. We go to the next screen. So this is hilarious because we were just talking about battle royales, and I was like, you should combine different genres of battle royales is the next step. And this is essentially the next step. It's a platformer. The next screen will show a bit of it. It's a platformer, massively multiplayer, battle royale type of game where I think like up to 60, maybe more, maybe 100. People get to go into one match, and then you're essentially playing a little Mario type game, but with everybody, right?
My friend is stupid excited for this game.
This game looks a lot of fun.
They got into beta access for this game, and they were playing it, and they love it. It seems like an amazing streamer game. It seems like a great streamer game. You know, if you had like a little audience, and you can just get your entire audience in there. Have you ever seen the game Marbles? No.
It's essentially a Twitch-based game where the streamer people can put in individual marbles and play themselves in the game.
Oh, wait a minute! I think I know this. Is it you're trying to eat all the other marbles?
I think there might be that mode maybe, but the one I saw was that they were trying to go through like an obstacle course, and whoever gets to the end is like the winner or something like that.
Oh no, not what I was thinking about. Interesting. Interesting.
This game looks like a lot of fun.
Whoa, I'm getting Trackmania vibes from this.
It is. It's kind of like it. Yeah, it's kind of like a time trial style game, Marbles. But yeah, Fall Guys looks very similar. And then they have a lot of cute customization options. Like this seems like a great, simple Candy Crush vibe game that kind of might be able to appeal to everyone. Oh yeah, that's the next game. So this kind of game encompasses the types of games that I love Devolver for. These, like, I assume this game is going to be less expensive than an $80 game. Like they're kind of known for giving
right now. It's
they're
$20.
known for like giving for cheap, good value like little games, which I love. Like, you know, Serious Sam isn't the big Doom Eternal type of game, even for what back then, but it was a cheap game, and it gave you that deathmatch feel, and they gave you a lot of value for the game that you actually paid for. And this seems like it would be like another one. And you know, the style is quite different than Digital Devolver's like super gruesome style. I think it would have been actually hilarious if they went super bloody but kept this cute style. Like it was like as tongue in cheek as
raises
their
hell.
yeah, like if it was as tongue in cheek as their direct tried to be, I think it would be hilarious. But this is very very PC, and I can understand why. I think they're trying to. This seems like a game that is meant for, you to play with your girlfriend or your parents or your family or whatever it is, and much more easy for everyone to get into than say Fortnite.
Yeah, I have nothing against this sort of aesthetic. I don't feel we need more violent stuff mixed in with our cute stuff. Yes, it's funny, but also I feel more games that more people can play comfortably with a wider variety of people is always good.
Yeah. There's nothing particularly wrong with it. Anyways, I'm excited for that game. The next game, Carrion.
Next game is tapping into the other side of me.
Yeah,
which is
so
very much into
that
sort of aesthetic.
You watched the trailer for this as well, I assume. Yeah, so this is really interesting.
I've been
the
waiting for
premise
this
is
game for like a
essentially
year.
that you play as some sort of flesh-eating monster. Is that right?
Yeah. So you play as a like a science experiment that has escaped, and it is just teeth and tentacles and horribleness incarnate. And you are looks like you're making your way through the lab to escape as you are consuming everything in your path and growing larger and larger.
Super interesting. Like, it's a cool different take. Like, almost like you're playing the boss character in these Metroidvania style games instead. It'd be cool if you can take different like forms and stuff. But it seemed like the gameplay is like it's like Resident Evil meets like Katamari or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this game also looks really good. I have a special like soft spot in my heart for these quality pixel art 2D games and Metroidvania type games. So this one is like right up that alley. Like I said, like these cheaper games that look like this one's probably gonna be like $20 or something like that. And it's so easy to drop $20 on this, and it'd be so much fun. And it's on Xbox Game Pass.
Yeah. So is Fall Guys also on Game Pass.
Oh, that's gonna be really good for
yeah.
them. That's gonna really blow up then if it's on Game Pass. Damn.
I hope so.
Okay. Yeah. So Karen looks good. This next game looks also really good. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Olija.
Oh, here's just a little more shots of.
Oh yeah, there's little shots. Yeah. So the next game is also a pixel art type of game. I thought it was Ouija at first, but I realized that was an L. Olija.
You seem to have a problem reading titles, Ken.
Maybe a bit dyslexic.
This and that far sales, or not far sales. I already forgot the name of that other game from PS5.
So this game looks a lot like Sword and Sorcery from the screenshots, right?
Yes.
Looks a lot like Sword and Sorcery. But I saw. Did you watch any of the gameplay for this?
I saw the trailer.
So the combat looked really interesting. Actually, it felt like it was actually a lot more in depth than your typical pixel fighter comp. There was like some ninja-esque stuff going on where your character would do takedowns and the combat.
There's a critical blow like component to it.
Yeah, and it looks really smooth. So I actually, because my only problem with some of these pixel art games of the past, not necessarily like Sword and Sorcery, is that the action seemed to be a little bit slow. Like I was worried about Sword and Sorcery itself was a pretty slow game in general.
Yeah.
So this one seemed to take that aesthetic, but really seemed to be able to amp up the gameplay a bit more.
It feels like it moves fast.
Yeah, it seems like it moves fast, a little bit more snappy.
Which had an interesting effect with me, in that I had to almost watch the trailer multiple times because I couldn't really understand what I was looking at.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you.
Some of the action got lost a little.
Yeah, because pixel art, you don't have a lot of pixels to showcase what you're doing, so you kind of have to cheat a little bit. You know what kind of reminds me of, what was that that platformer that you showed me a few episodes ago, where it was a Japanese like assassin, but half of the day is
French.
actually him living.
French assassin.
Yeah.
Arrest of a Stone Buddha.
Yeah, rest of it reminds me of, but just the action part, just like the action part, and then they distilled that part down.
You mean there isn't going to be a 20-minute sequence where I'm just going around and getting coffee?
Hey, maybe there is. Like Sword and Sorcery had that kind of slow sequences, so maybe this one will have it.
Yeah.
But this one looks really good too. Like I said, the games that they were announced were really interesting. They didn't get a chance to showcase too much of the gameplay here. So, do you know when this one was supposed to be out? Oh, is there demo? Do we know when the announce date's supposed to be? I'll look it up real quick.
No release date that I looked at, because I saw websites saying like, and it's out now. I'm like, what? I should look at this.
Well, it's coming to
go buy
the
this.
Nintendo Switch, which is kind of really cool, actually.
Devolver seems to really like putting stuff out on the Switch. Even their back catalog is on Switch. I think Shadow War is on Switch as well, which is impressive.
It seems to me that they're like a publisher that kind of specializes in efficient, low-budget types of projects. One of the things that I kind of noticed from the Serious Sam team, because I played Serious Sam VR, which was their overhaul for all of like Serious Sam's 1, 2, 3. You can play it completely in VR now.
Oh, so is it not the wave shooter one, but the
no,
actual
not the wave shooter
overhauls?
one. They converted their full games over to VR.
Yep.
And what I've always noticed is that like in their conversion, they gave the player a lot of settings and a lot of options, and they really executed the conversion of their games like really, really well, all the way down to like you're able to customize how far you have to pull the trigger on the Vive controller for a bullet to come out.
Interesting.
In a game like Serious Sam where you're shooting a lot, you're pulling that trigger probably like several thousand times per playthrough, right? And so that was just the kind of, I don't know. I love that they were always giving you really good value for your projects, and so it was. I
feel like that's more of a praise for Crow Team and their engine that they developed, because that uses their own proprietary Serious engine. And if you ever go digging into their video settings, they have a plethora. Like a massive amount of options, all broken down between here's what's going to hit your GPU, here's what's going to hit your CPU.
It's true.
And then here's where your RAM is going to be managed.
Yeah.
And then you can tweak all those individual settings to like oblivion.
Yeah, it could be an aspect of Crow Team, actually. You're right, because they do have really good settings. Like I feel like it's kind of lame to talk about, but I really appreciate the options that, like, that's why I play PC games, right? Like, the settings make a difference. The last game that they announced, unfortunately for me, I think is the weakest announcement, not because I don't love the Serious Sam franchise. It's because the gameplay that they showed was, it felt like the same as Serious Sam 3. I didn't see anything particularly new. And like we were talking about, you know, with Doom Eternal kind of shifting the bar so heavily in their own game, like I want to see more improvements. I think I love Serious Sam, but I don't think that Serious Sam 3 could come out today and compete. You know what I mean?
I don't think Serious Sam could compete when it came out back in 20.
It was already a little behind back then too. Yeah, they were a little behind.
There is a version of Luis inside of me that will always show up for a Serious Sam game.
Me too.
That is not the logical and critical thinking version of me. That is the I played so much of Serious Sam 1 and 2 on, and I have a very near and dear relationship with just quick paced shooters like Quake, Quake and Doom and
Unreal
and Serious Sam, Unreal Tournament.
Yeah.
And so seeing those types of games still having that quick movement and wide open fields, that the core problem that you're trying to solve is not so much where you are taking cover and recovering health by staying still. It's by managing your ammo, the types of enemies you're facing, the quantity, and having to deal with that problem in that sort of way, and knowing there's nothing else for you to fall back on. Yeah. And that you have to make sure you're quick saving all the time.
Yeah. Go to the next frame for a second. This is the gameplay.
Yep. That's sort of for me always going to be near and dear to my heart, but I didn't finish Serious Sam 3.
Yeah, me neither. It felt, because Serious Sam 3 felt exactly the same. It felt so similar.
It felt even slower in some cases.
Yeah.
And I think part of the problem with that is when I think of Serious Sam, I started thinking about the later levels in that game. Sort of in Serious Sam 2, when you go into a temple and you fall into a pit, and it's actually turns out it is a bungee pit. So you're bouncing up and down all the time, and then they start putting the kamikaze guys, and then they start coming out, and you're like, the entire time because they're oscillating. Yeah. And that's the Serious Sam bullshit that I like. I like it when you turn a corner and like it's quiet, And then suddenly, like, just that music that starts like, oh, just starts playing, and all these people are rushing down at you, and you're like, fuck, backpedaling behind. I like the Serious Sam that has the song called "I Hate Running Backwards." It's that sort of stuff that I enjoy about Serious Sam. But I got halfway through that game, and I haven't really gotten to the point where they started doing interesting things. There might be good stuff for down the line in Serious Sam 3. They might get there eventually. I haven't finished it. I started playing it recently. I want to finish it and see if it gets there before Serious Sam 4 comes out.
Me too.
But they gotta hit that creativity early. They gotta do those interesting levels.
I feel like they're trapped in their own nostalgia right now. If you look at the monsters that they showed in Serious Sam 4, they're all callbacks. They're almost all callbacks except one monster they showed at the very end that looked like a Doom 3 demon or Doom 4 demon.
Yeah, the big Final Fantasy Titan-esque gentleman.
Yeah. So, and my problem is like, that's great that you want to bring back some of your nostalgia, but look at what Doom did. Like they brought back all of their old bosses, but they changed and they included a new mechanic in almost every single one of their bosses.
Yes.
One of them, which I thought they really should have put in this game, was the idea of hitting weak points in some of your monsters, especially the big ones. In this one here, like they all look like they're just bullet sponges, and the graphic, there wasn't any innovation in the monsters, and there wasn't any innovations in the guns. That was my biggest disappointment. And then like you have to pick one, right? There has to be some sort of, like Doom did both. Doom innovated their guns with mods and different, like, the best idea in the world with their freaking super shotgun chain, which is, oh my god, just the best mechanic in the world. I would have loved to see something that really emphasized, like you're talking about, the differences in this type of shooter versus Doom, which is wide open plains, and I want more like napalm strike weapons and different weapons that might be able to play around with reshaping damage on the battlefield rather than your simple point and click like ray trace gun shooter, right? You see here there's a shotgun, and then the other shotgun they showed was the barrel shotgun, but it looked like it did the same thing. Just looked like they just upped the damage number or something like that.
Up the damage number, increase the recoil. There's no recoil in Serious Sam. Actually, wait. Did they put recoil in Serious Sam 3?
No, there's no recoil, but there is bullet spread in some of their guns. Yeah. So the recoil would be like as you shoot it more, the worse your spread gets. But no, there's no additional spread. At least in the old games, maybe.
In the old games, definitely not. I think in Serious Sam 3, the assault rifle had recoil.
Oh, you might be right. You might be right with the assault rifle.
Yeah. But that was a weird game because it had all these conventional weapons in this unconventional game. It took a while until you got the cannonball, the nuclear cannonballs back.
This is the kind of epitome of the mistakes that the series is going through right now is kind of summarized in the fact that they had a sniper rifle in their game at all, where you can shoot one bullet and kill one dude if you hit the right spot, but it takes like 6 seconds to shoot, and you're in a game where you're fighting like a million things. Do you remember this? It was just kind of
they added it in Serious Sam 2. In the second encounter, not Serious Sam 2. Yeah, that's a bad game.
So like it was kind of like, oh, you're missing the uniqueness of your game right now, and maybe they're going through what Doom went through with Doom 3, and that they're trying to go in a different direction, or they just don't know what really made their original games as fun, and then they'll recorrect themselves in the next series. I'm really hoping so, because I do love the franchise, and I think there's like plenty of room for much less serious like wave shooters, especially if they were to do some sort of co-op with this kind of mechanic. I think it would. Well, their old games
have a ton of co-op, like
their old
across
games
the
always
series.
had co-op, but I don't think
even Serious Sam 3 had co-op as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, I didn't feel that the Serious Sam 3, the game was developed for co-op, because it was essentially you just did your own thing, and then one person might die if the waves got too much, but it wasn't like there wasn't anything to play off each other, So I would hope that they would do something with that, but unfortunately, my most excited game for the conference was my least, my least impressive game, which was Serious Sam 4. But maybe they'll show more footage. I'm hopeful, but from what I saw so far, it wasn't quite
Don't you also have
enough.
like a motorcycle in this game? I saw some shots of that.
I do remember something like that.
Is the idea that this because previously this game was called Serious Sam for Planet Badass.
I do remember that. Yeah. I guess,
and was the idea that it's going to be a larger world, or?
I remember that they had some initial announcements, but the trailers that they showed were essentially the same. I don't remember seeing any particular like space stuff. Well, maybe he was in a spaceship. I think that was why.
He was in a spaceship. I'm just more wondering, like, is this also another level-based game, or is it, or is it something that you're just going through arenas and levels a little bit more seamlessly? No, open world. Don't.
Can you imagine if they made Serious Sam an open world game? That would be so upsetting.
I don't know how.
Yeah. No. I think I would want to see. I want to see some innovation. That's all I can really say. If it's Serious Sam 4 is kind of like the same linear progression bar as Serious Sam 3. It's not going to do it for me. I think games have changed now. Everything is so much more advanced in terms of movement and options that you can't get away with that kind of more basic shooter. Yeah.
I feel if at least they add those zany levels that they got into towards the end of the second encounter, I would be at least happier, even if everything else stayed the same. I would like to see sort of that creativity in those encounters, literally, appear more. Even if they keep the same content the same, I can stand with that. To me, it doesn't need to be like a big Doom overhaul, but there needs to be something going on in that level that like just catches you off guard. And I don't know if they're more reluctant to do it because the game looks a lot more realistic now, quote unquote, just with the lighting and the brightness. The city in Serious Sam 3 felt more like a city. It wasn't like just a random castle or pyramids or temples or weird fantasy Euro faint Scandinavia town.
It was like an arena that you like every time you went into a level in Serious Sam 1 and 2, you were like, this is an arena. Versus like in the third one, they started to push it to more like maybe this looks like an Uncharted level kind of feel to it.
Yeah, this actually feels like a town, not just a bullshit gameplay zone, which is kind of really what I just want. Like I don't need that from this game. I need it to be crazy stupid.
You want them to spend the resources in the parts that count, and the realism of their environment is not in their strengths. Yeah. Anyways, that's pretty much it for Devolver Digital's. There's one more I totally missed. If you go to the next slide. Yep. So this is. They made an entire game. This is me like side. They made an entire game as a part of their parody. Is that there's a game called Devolver Land Expo where you go into a spooky rundown carnival style Disney World, but it's all Devolver games.
Okay.
If you go to the next slide, this is their tongue in cheek in terms of combining marketing and their idea of like a playable trailer, I guess. I don't know.
This looks way too good.
It's arguably the most realistically lit game in their entire franchise that they showed like entirely. It is from what I saw, a very basic stealth shooter type game where there are just robots roaming throughout this little abandoned carnival type like space, and they have different areas like a Serious Sam land and a Fall Guys world, etc. And then you can like unlock trailers for the games. That's how people would find out about the games when they first launched. They launched this Devolver Land, and if you beat the game, you get to see trailers for Fall Guys and Shadowland Raiders and stuff like that. I hate the whole thing. I hate the whole thing. I'm sorry. No. Your opinion is completely standard because everyone online was like, "This is great. This is like revolutionizing like marketing," and I was like, "I hate this whole goddamn thing. I don't want to play. Ken? I don't want to play an ad. I don't want to play your like the only game that I can think of that was a good game that was an ad was this old Burger King game that they included in like this PS1 game that they included in your like in your Burger King meal." And it was like a Mario Kart racer.
Sneak King and Kart King
it was legitimately Mario Kart's best competitor on the PlayStation because the PlayStation had like shit kart games compared to like Mario Kart, right? So that's the only game and that was like a complete accident. This game, they spent the time to make a whole game. You know how much effort. You know how much effort goes into making a game. Can't that effort have gone into
I've never
the
made a game in my
game?
life.
Like, oh my god, I'm sorry. I'm so frustrated because this game looks good. It's very impressive in terms of its look. It looks realistic. There's a style to it. They obviously designed this whole like amusement park. But
again though, this reinforces their brand and their games. It's
Well, yeah, you're 100% right. But it's so obvious that they're trying to do that. Like it's not. It's like you're parodying it, but you're not. It's like someone saying, "Hey, man, like, isn't it so funny that guy there is scamming all your money? Give me $10 and I'll tell you why he's scamming your money." But I'm like, "You're just scamming me now. Like, you're making fun of these guys, but you're doing the exact same thing to me." It's ironic, right? So, like, cause think about it. It's a marketer's dream that you're playing a game and the reward you give for your player is an ad for another game that you have. Mm-hmm. That's their dream, right? And to me as a player, I'm like, this is disrespectful to the genre of stealth shooters. This is disrespectful for the idea of a game that you. And the problem is, like, if they really went ham on this and they went like, oh, this is like, the carnival from It, and like the It monster is like, possessing it, and it's super dark and gritty, but it's not. It's super clean. It's not even bloody inside this carnival. It's just creepy because it's dark, and the monsters that you're running from are like cartoonish level sentry guards with like scanning lasers, so they're not even scary. So
they can't scare people away from like seeing the games, the advertisements.
That's exactly why it can't be a good game. The exact conversation that's happening that would ruin any other game is wholly embraced in this game here.
I guess the interesting part of it is that part of me is like impressed with it and kind of like, oh, that's a nice little thing, and I'm like, I'm never gonna play it.
Yeah, that's exactly like I love nice. That they try.
It feels like something that you build goodwill of, right?
I'm impressed that they tried, but I have to say that they missed their mark. That's my whole thing about this. And not even like just in a sense of, hey, you're like a gamer nerd and you just want this and you just want that. Like, I'm talking on my marketing side here. Imagine you're gonna announce a product, right? And you're gonna spend how much money is spent on an average AAA marketing side of a game? Like, are you familiar? Millions. Oftentimes, it's equal the development budget. It's almost sometimes it's more than the development budget of the actual game is spent on the marketing of it.
Yeah,
right?
Isn't the Grand Theft Auto 5 marketing budget was $300 million or something crazy like that?
Yes, huge. That was one of the ones where I think it was bigger than their actual development costs. So it's huge, right? What was my point about this again? I lost myself for a second. What was I saying here? Luis, help me, please.
You're saying that they spent so much money on marketing and that because of that...
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so there's these 4 or 5 games that they want to announce, right? Mm-hmm. And you have this much money to spend it on it. But what you're doing is first you're gating all the information about the announcements behind a 2-hour-long video, right? Where you're going to lose some people like me, people who are bored, people who don't have the time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're losing that much of your audience already. And then you show these trailers, and then you lock more information about the games behind a whole game that a lot of people said they couldn't play because the specs were too high. It's a massive ask. Ask anyone. Talking about click-through rates, the idea of like how much money people have to spend to get someone to click through a link. Mm-hmm. Like the amount of money you have to get someone to spend to download your app is even more. Now imagine the amount of people you have to spend to download like 20, I don't know how, at least 5 gigs, maybe 10 gigs for a game that looks like this, right? Of information, install it on their computer, and then play it. It's like you're shrinking down the audience that you're going to reach by so much, but by the end of it, there's so little money of that marketing that actually has gone into telling people about the games that you were supposed to talk to them about, right? So if I was one of these games, like, I hope that, I don't know how the deals are done, so, they probably don't have budgets that are directly connected to the marketing for Digital Direct, or Devolver Direct, but I would be a little upset that like you could have done it so much more efficiently and got a better reach for the audience, and then helped support these games even more. Had you not gone for something that was essentially in the advertising world, there, like in the advertising world, traditional advertising, there are ad awards, like people give. It's like the Oscars for ads, right? And then it's become contentious because companies are making ads to win these awards, but they're not necessarily helping the client at all, or as much as effectively as the money spent into it. And this is what it feels like to me, is that this is somehow this thing became about the marketing team and this Devolver Land Expo and the video that the team wanted to put together, and the humor, etc. And you can tell me that maybe that's a part of your plan, and if so, then I don't have the same kind of stakes that they were holding. But if this was to help your studios release their games, it would be a ridiculous proposition for most studios to say this is a good idea. And
it's mostly selling Devolver Digital itself more so than the games.
It really is. And maybe that's what their plan was. Maybe they said that, for 2020, we need to get this particular publisher brand on the map, so that for whatever reason, maybe there's business plans or it's a long-term plan to help the rest of the studios. But I would say that if I was to look at it as what a traditional marketing campaign should do, I think that kind of failed in my end. Also the scope was so much bigger than they needed for games that were budget games for us to buy. Like, they could have announced like Olija and what was the other Carrion, like with a smaller gameplay trailer that almost all indie gameplay like studios do, and I would have been just as happy and interested in those games. Like, what else could you have done with that money that you spent on the direct, right? So that's my whole thing about
even like that's a good point, because even like Serious Sam 4 is a $40 game.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Olija has a demo out now, but I don't even think even the trailer said that. You didn't know about it.
I didn't know about the trailers. Like, I honestly
didn't know about the demo. Yeah.
I missed a couple of games that I had to go back and look up afterwards, and this is from someone that I wanted to like cover it, So I think that was my thing about the direct. Besides the quality of whether it successfully got the humor across or not, it felt like it just was a bit of a waste in terms of money. I could be wrong though, because there's a lot of people that like it, and I'm very much willing to accept the idea that it's just my personal preference. Sometimes maybe you have a flavor that no one else can taste, and you eat this meal and you're like, oh, this is gross. But I think
you are a marketing expert. That literally is your job. So you're the Gordon Ramsay. Looking at this trailer,
I want to be as mean as Gordon Ramsay, because they're like, I do want to highlight the things that they did like well. Like some of the writing was pretty funny. The quality was pretty good for what you would expect from a marketing team. But when you're shooting yourself against like comedy and like other like aspects of film,
comedy is hard, right?
Comedy is very, very hard.
It's
like,
very hard.
I think that was my biggest problem, and that's the biggest pitfall that almost every like E3 conference does, is that they try to be funny in some weird way, and it just doesn't
remember the famous Mr. Caffeine guy. Let's go back in time.
Everyone remembers YouTube Rewind, right? Everyone remembers their attempts to like be cool and hip, right? So that's. But I do love that it's a different flavor. I love that maybe if the conference was like 30 minutes and then the rest of it was trailers, even if they kept the trailers the same length, that would have been much better for me. Because I think that they had like one joke that they stretched out for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it killed me. Oh, yeah.
All right.
Anyways, that's all I have for Devolver. I'm looking forward to a few of their games.
Yeah. Let's then take that and switch over to a different aesthetic. I want to talk about, there was also the Ubisoft Forward press conference, but I'm not so much interested in talking about that since it's very straightforward. It's ads for their upcoming games. But I am interested in some comments that I heard before about this cyberpunk aesthetic that has been starting to permeate a lot.
Yeah.
in our
Games.
general, how do you say, media sphere, I guess.
It's like the zeitgeist of like movies and stuff. They're starting to talk about cyberpunk a lot. You see it in games like obviously Cyberpunk, the game itself, but you also see it in a lot of movies. The concept has been around, like it obviously starts from regular punk, right? And then as soon as the sci-fi world started to take off, and then it's a melding of the two genres. So it has been becoming a lot more prevalent in almost like all aspects of media, movies, games, right?
And the interesting part about when I saw it in Watch Dogs Legion, for example, is, and you can see here or in the image that I have up on the bottom, there's all these different random people on the street that you can recruit into your legion of cyber hackers to take down an evil corporation.
Yeah.
And they're all sort of cyberpunked up in a way, even in the animation shown by your favorite Alberto Millet.
You were saying, I didn't realize it was by him.
Mielgo.
I don't know. I'm guessing too.
Yeah. There was one of the primary characters was this lady with a gas mask and with like Illuminati drawings on it. And sort of this aesthetic, and someone that brought up is like it's interesting that they're leveraging this sort of aesthetic that implies like rebellion and taking out this corporate structure, and it's being made by Ubisoft, which is a big corporation in and of itself, who control over 200 studios around the world, pretty much. And the initial thought that I had with that is yes, you are right. But at the end of the day, it is a select few people that are making these creative decisions to use this sort of aesthetic. So I was interested in how you as a creative viewed that, right?
Yeah, I find
because you as an individual may want to represent feelings of rebellion and that sort of emotion and aesthetic. And then using this sort of aesthetic, which has, when it was not frequently used, it became rebellious. Now that it has been commercialized and sold to the highest bidder, do you feel like that devalues it a little?
Well, it's super interesting because this is the same thing that happened with the punk movement in music back in the day. So punk, the whole genre came out of this rebellious act of fighting against their forefathers who went through, the world wars and were very rigid people. And then coming out of it, there was a movement to, fight against the man, so to say. But then, like almost every subculture that's ever appeared, especially anything that's anti-authoritarian, it's always happened. It gets kind of co-opted because people realize that people see the genre from the outside, and there are going to be people who want to enter into the genre or want to be like them, like punk, because it's popular. And then they realize they can sell the aesthetic to them to help them mimic like they're inside the group. So then that's when punk clothing became like really popular. And, like this is kind of seen in the band Kiss, right? They're like this heavy metal band that's the aesthetic is very much like a hardcore punk rock aesthetic, but they are probably one of the most commercialized bands of all time, right? They've sold action figures and stuff like that. And there has always been this kind of debate between whether they are legit, they have like...
Have they sold out?
Or have they sold out, yeah. But it's a bit different in video games because there's no games out there outside of maybe indie games that can be considered in and of themselves rebellious. Because to make a game, you need a large studio, and so you can't really rebel. You can't have a bunch of rebels making a game, okay? That's not how games work. The only reason that some of these really wild indie games can come out is because they're made by a few people. If you're working with 100 people, there's no way you're going to be able to get them for a bunch of people who rebel to work together to make a game, right? Like game development itself is all about cooperation and problem solving together as a team, right? Like, so when I look at the punk genre in games, or especially cyberpunk, I see movements of the punk movement, but essentially co-opted to a more modern day time. And for the most part, it's just part of the industry going through these waves of genres. And you'll see this a lot, and you'll see it right now too. I'll actually even ask you, what do you guess the current? Because cyberpunk is actually a bit old now in terms of the industry genre that it's on. What's the current genre that the industry is on right now, do you think?
Industry,
like the games industry. Like, there was a while where steampunk was really in. That was during the what was that game that was like Assassin's Creed?
Yeah.
But
game that was like Assassin's Creed, but Far Cry, Blood Dragon.
No, it was like a steampunk game where you had like there was like whale oil and there was a bit of like mysticism.
Dishonored.
Dishonored, yeah, that was a steampunk. That was during the steampunk era, and then that kind of moved on.
I feel like now we're like in a sort of a retro wave.
Yep.
Sort of feel.
I think you'll see a lot of Asian types games coming out right now. A lot of games. I think that's for a number of reasons. There's a lot of pull from China's market for a lot of Asian type feels games. But you have like Ghost of Tsushima coming out, right? We had Sekiro a little while ago, and then we have Shadow Demons. What was the game that we just had? Shadow Warriors 3, right? Very, very Japanese or Asian like architectural aesthetic coming out. So I think that's kind of like the current wave. And with Cyberpunk, all I saw was that it was a kind of wave that everyone got onto. Oh, also Vikings is a current one too, by the way. Like Vikings is a really big one right now. And I do think the industry goes through waves in terms of like what it recycles. And for the Cyberpunk side, I never found it as a true movement for rebellion for anyone, because it's always kind of been more of a storytelling element for the modern sci-fi world, and it was essentially to represent the fact that if we were to imagine like the future, it's the opposite of the Star Trek world. It's the things are decayed, over authoritarian, and less like world ethics are like available, right?
I feel like a big component of it though is also the democratization of technology, which is very relevant. I feel.
So what do you mean by that?
It's when you think about how computers were originally looked at, right? When they were on sets, they were workstations, right? Only white collar people had computers, and they used it strictly for business, right? Only people had those satellite phones, and they strictly used them to make important phone calls. Technology right now has become democratized, and this has gradually been eroding barriers. There was a much higher barrier of making streams, putting on YouTube videos. Production itself of digital media has become democratized.
Yeah, it's true.
Which is interesting because cyberpunk itself has roots back in 1984 since Neuromancer, pretty much.
Neuromancer, Blade Runner, like that whole genre was the start of it, really. Yeah.
But I feel now it has sort of changed. If you look at Watch Dogs Legion, the idea is that technology has been democratized anyway, that these hackers are controlling these advanced purpose-built machines in order to invoke their revolution against tyranny and oppression, right? Yeah. And I feel that's sort of the angle they are using that on, but at the same time, it's its own weapon being used by corporations too.
Well, I think that it's become a caricature now.
Yeah.
If you look at the old,
it's hard to take seriously at this point, right? Because that idea of democratization of technology is almost equivalent to the democratization of knowledge, right? Of everyone should have access to books. Everyone should have access to proper education. Now it's everyone should have proper access to internet, right?
I find it interesting that the old moral of having cyberpunk in the world was to showcase that, like, when a world becomes too authoritarian, this is kind of the result that everyone has to go to, and it was more of a comment and a warning, in terms of the statement that it was making. Whereas now it's
a celebration almost.
It's a celebration
exactly that.
And it's interesting that like a company is making a game so that you can feel like you're rebelling, even though you're not really doing anything of the sort. Well, that's what all games are. You want to feel like a Viking. You want to feel like blah blah. Like this is to feel like
Back
you
to Spec Ops: The
are.
Line.
Yeah.
You're here because you want it to be something that you're not.
Yeah. So in that way, it can be a powerful like storytelling tool. But I actually think that almost every game hasn't really used cyberpunk in any interesting way besides it's a cool aesthetic and it looks different. Like I think it's been mainly driven by the aesthetic side rather than the storytelling side. Even Watch Dogs, the first iteration of it, you remember when that trailer first came out, it seemed, I was excited because I thought it was going to be a much bigger story than it ended up being, or at least the game ended up telling. And I don't know if it's really bringing anything of particular value right now. I'm interested in Cyberpunk, but I'm also very cautious about Cyberpunk. We talked a little about this before. The delays that are coming out and also the trailer they showed a while back. It was a sizzle trailer, but it didn't for me have very much content that was interesting. That was
I
like,
think
exciting.
the only one to show off that trailer's cut purely from the intro mission of the game. I believe they said.
Yep. Yeah.
It was mainly meant to. Also had a much lighter and playful tone than I was expecting as well.
Until the part where the guy like arms up and starts slicing everyone.
Yeah, even then, like there's a pulpiness, there's a pulpy levity to it.
Yeah, it's not like
know?
it's not like they went into like the Last of Us territory where you feel like kind of sick to your stomach watching some of the stuff. It definitely felt like, oh, this is a video game and they're kind of playing around with stuff, right?
And I feel like true cyberpunk should make you feel a little gross. When you read some of the depictions that William Gibson writes in his cities, just the sheer, not depravity, but or the poverty of the situations, right?
Yeah.
And the way the denizens are just like, look, I just shoved this thing into my wrist now I have this thing, and like, no, that is unhygienic on so many different levels.
Yeah, whereas this looks like a bunch of like hipster kids that like decided to buy a bunch of cyberpunk clothing from H&M or something like that.
And again, I feel that sort of is what appeals to the mass market, right? That's what appeals to the hot topics of the world. It's not a, again, it's a celebration, it's not a warning. It's what always happens, because cyberpunk has, cyberpunk and punk in general was a movement of being different than the rest of people. But then when you have a group that has a strong culture around it and people want to enter into that culture, it's hard for a group to be based around keeping others away and also grow at the same time. And essentially, it always ends up being corrupted in one way or another. This is not necessarily that this is a corrupting influence, because cyberpunk isn't a actual world culture. It's a guess as to what the culture might evolve to one day based off of real life punk, right? So it doesn't have any real world ramifications in terms of like, they're selling out or whatever, because there's no real cyberpunks, right? There's nothing to sell out. It's always been sold.
It's always been sold out. It's always been a fabrication. It's like someone complaining that the elves are not correct in a movie, and I'm like, well, they're made up. There's no real elf to say that they're comparing it to, and this is the same thing. There's no real cyberpunk for you. Like the only thing close is kind of like maybe a Banksy type of situation, but he's just punk. He's just like a graffiti artist, right, in modern times. So, I do find the aesthetic interesting in general. I do think that it's a little shallow, in the same way that when I saw the steampunk world, it was a bit shallow in terms of what I felt that if it could like go deeper and deeper into. Where if you compare that to like a game like let's say like Assassin's Creed, and they have their sci-fi element and how flexible and in-depth they've been able to use that type of storytelling inside so many different versions of their game. I think that's what lends itself to depth. Is like this is like when we're talking about battle royales being a mechanic that you want to mix in, cyberpunk is like an element that you can mix in, but it really needs to be a part of a bigger story about like about the government maybe, like, or maybe about like people, like if you look at Blade Runner, it's about a person that's living in a cyberpunk world, and the cyberpunk is a flavor that helps like describe part of the story. It's not enough to hold itself to be the main course. I don't think you can have a game where you say cyberpunk is the theme and that's enough for me to be interested in to play it. Right? Yeah.
All right. That's a good enough place for us to leave off, and let's jump on to our last topic of the day.
Cool. Open world games.
Open worlds, also known as the past 20 years of our lives and the future 20 years of our lives.
Do you think that games will just get more and more open world as like we go on? Like we see
I think we've already hit that point.
Yeah.
I think at the point is where we have to contract a little bit and think about what are the emotions we want to evoke with an open world.
Yeah.
Right, and go back to that basics. And I know I talk about emotions a lot, but really to me that's the core of any sort of game design. But to kick this sort of off, what got me thinking about this recently is watching the Ubisoft conference and then seeing all the games they announced, and pretty much all of them were open world games with the exception of Trials Rising. And I got to thinking about, well, what are we doing with open world games to make them successful? Because I'm reaching the point in my life where if someone says the game is open world, that's a detractor for me, because I think about, well, I'm going to be spending a lot of time in this world doing content that's not exactly super fulfilling to me.
Well,
but
what do you think is sorry, go ahead.
But at the same time, you can play an open world game and have these very player driven experiences in a non-linear fashion that really lends itself to creativity and sort of player-driven investigation of the world and the game mechanics, which is extremely powerful, which is what made them popular in the first place. And I feel along the way we sort of lost that, and it became an hours count thing. It became a density thing.
How big is your map?
How big is your map? What's in it? How many activities do you have? How many hours are you going to spend in this? And it lost that sort of, nah, dog, in GTA 3, it's a real breathing world and you can go anywhere, right? That became rote. So when that became rote, it then said, well, what is there to do in the city? I'm like, well, there's these handfuls of activities. I'm like, okay, yeah, but what if there were just 50 of them? And then it became, how do you explore this world?
Well, let me ask you, what do you think the strengths and weaknesses of having an open world game are versus having, say, a linear game, you know?
It's like I said before, it is definitely the player-driven aspect of it. It is, you are giving the player an affordance to navigate the world at their own pace, to spend time doing things that they find important, instead of being railroaded into a singular activity. That allows for you to engage the player's curiosity in more relaxing ways, instead of, say, Doom, which is you're gonna play this game the way we want you to play it, and that's all you're gonna do. And you're either gonna play it correctly or you're gonna die. And
go ahead.
Oh, did I just lose my camera?
You're frozen on my screen, and I'm not sure if your camera is still frozen.
Yep.
You're in the middle of a very important point. I think that's a very good point. My whole thing that I was just going to say is I was going to ask you what your first open world game that you can remember that you would describe as an open world game. Grand Theft Auto 3. So in my opinion, I think this might not be 100% technically true in terms of the first quote unquote open world game, but the first instance that in mainstream media is actually, I think, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Interesting. So before that, you think about the time era. It came out on the N64, right? It was the first 3D game, like part of the first generation of 3D games, right? It was released, I think, either pretty close or on launch with the N64. And it was the first game where you had a night-day cycle that was built into the world, and there was persistent world elements, right? So I bring that up.
Only the overworld, though.
Yeah, it has only the overworld. So it was essentially a hybrid. It had your sections of linear gameplay, but you had the overworld where you would connect people together, right? I only brought it up because I wanted to see if we take this basic example of what the open world brought, because I think that open world really, really affected the Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time game itself,
The fact that you had this persistent world where you were traveling around and there was a night and day cycle, and it felt like you were saying help give you that feeling of things being like real and like a living, breathing environment that you're in.
Yep. I agree with you, and I think I'll go even a step farther and say original Legend of Zelda did an even better job of that. Even though that game was really difficult to figure out where you're going, where you're doing, and there was a correct way to do the dungeons, and it was a strict order, you were still left alone in that world to sort of figure out your way, and that is definitely driven by player curiosity, and that is I think something that games are trying to start to get back to, including with say Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
But before we get there, since that's a recent thing, I wanna step back and let's take a look at where I thought we started to go wrong with this.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna put an image here for you.
I haven't.
Do you know what this is?
Yeah, this is exactly what I was thinking too.
This is the map of Assassin's Creed Unity, and it is populated with icons.
Yeah.
We reached a point in game design, and Far Cry 3 has a lot to blame for this, I feel. Oh, sorry, not Far Cry 3, Assassin's Creed 1 even has a lot to blame of you climbing to the top of the tower and clearing out an area. But in that original game, it didn't really populate a lot of icons. There wasn't that many activities. It was a very bare bones experience.
It was
they didn't even put banners, which were the main collectible in that was never appearing on the map. By the time we got to Assassin's Creed Unity, which is the 7th game in the franchise, I think, maybe it might be 6th, doesn't matter, we started putting icons for everything. So all the banners, all the chests, you could buy maps for everything, you could find out what everything is. We started going into the phase of checklist open world games, where you started going into areas expecting to get exactly something. It became less about the exploration element to it. It became always like, I'm going to enter this area. I'm not going to explore the area. I'm going to go to the point marked on my map that's going to unfog it.
It's a checklist that you're running through the entire time. Yeah.
My exploration component became reduced to, how do I reach the top of that place?
How do you think that they got to this? What happened that led them down this path? I have an idea, and I'll see if you.
My idea is they looked at how many people collected the banners in Assassin's Creed, how many people did all the side activities, and saw it was extremely low. So they thought, how can we get people to stay in our game more and see stuff? And the solution is, well, if they aren't aware of where the stuff is, why would they spend more time in our world? Which, not along those lines, because I disagree with that statement.
Yeah, it was a Band-Aid fix, essentially.
Yes, and I don't want to say that this sort of game design is wrong, because I think it does make it for people that want to do checklists in games. And there's definitely moments in time where I do want to just know, okay, what is everything I can do and where can I do it, and then I can engage with the gameplay loops there. For example, side missions and stuff like that, put them on my map. I'm happy enough to know that that's there, and I can go and do it, and I can go on unique gameplay there. But where I think it falters is when we're doing stuff like this, where we're putting a bunch of chests, a bunch of collectibles, a bunch of notes, a bunch of banners. And we're populating our map and saying, okay, go to all these and get them. Because that's not gameplay, that's a distraction.
That's a chore list that you're
That's a chore. And the example that I go back to when I'm describing these sort of elements and the issues I have with them is, think about it in the way of when you're going shopping for something. You're going buy groceries. You want to buy, I'm going to make a salad. I need cucumbers, carrots, and spinach. That's what I make my salad. I know I'm going to go to Safeway next door, and I'm going to go find my salad. If my salad is not there or I'm having trouble finding it, I'm having a bad time. If I go there and I get a salad, I'm only doing exactly what I expected. When I'm going hiking, I'm thinking, well, there is that trail there that someone told me about. I'm going to go hiking. If along I'm going that hiking trail, I find a vista that I really like, that is a rewarding experience that I wasn't going to expect. Someone says, oh, there's a really cool vista. I'm going there and I'm seeing it, and I feel this feels great. Along the way, I find a 4-leaf clover or something, or I take this really great picture, or I see an eagle taking a salmon out of a river. I'm like, oh my God, this was worth it. And I wasn't expecting this. This is the core of human curiosity and experience, right? And when I see images of games like they showed off here for Valhalla, which is this. That's what I want an open world game to be. And what I'm showing now is a Valhalla picture of Ivor on a cliff overlooking this castle in the distance. There is an aurora borealis in the background, an eagle flying in the sky, and these frozen ice cascades.
Is this the new Assassin's Creed game?
New Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what I want from open world games, is exactly what this image is trying to sell me. This sense of the adventure, ready to go explore. I don't know what's in that castle, but it's lit up. There is something inside of it, and I want to go and investigate that and see what it is.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No. Okay,
Nope,
so
your turn.
I think that they were. I think the Assassin's Creed games tried to have their cake and eat it too. I think part of what Assassin's Creed 1 did that was a kind of a silent revolution was their idea of finding a way to make modular gameplay elements and then multiply them so you can have a lot of content, right? That was the whole idea behind the towers,
Yes.
where you can have a bunch of towers. It's the same element of you climbing, etc., but you get the same reward, but you have like 50 of them, right? And the biggest problem of making the open world game like during that time was population of content.
Exactly.
That was Far Cry's kind of problem early on. You know, the content was quite bland in the early Far Cry games. You were really amazed at first, and you're like, "Wow, it's an open world," and you realize like almost all the areas play exactly the same, right? There's just like bad guys here, and sometimes they have rocket launchers or something like that.
And even there, that was enough though for Far Cry 3. I feel that was one of my favorite games at the time. Like I played it, and as a player, I was incredibly engaged with it. I wanted to do those outposts and feel those mechanics, and I felt like I had a lot of bang for my buck. And as a content creation strategy, it is extremely smart because what you have is only 3 to 4 different types of activities, and you're just scattering and remixing them in that level. But I
Which
feel
is a very
like
smart gameplay thing to do, like
Yeah.
in terms of a game design thing. But there's problems that come up when you do that.
I feel at this point we reached a point where we need to push. We need to be more intelligent with how we generate our content, because we have reached a point where games are something that there are live games and that people are going to be spending a ton of time in that weren't in the past, right? And now games like this are open world games that are not live games that your friends are not going to be playing, are going to be asking a similar amount of time commitment, but they can't compete with something that you've been playing for 3 years, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
like
not,
an online MMO versus like a single player
Exactly.
open world game, right? Yeah.
And when I come to an open world game like this, I don't need to spend 50 hours with it to feel I got my money's worth. And that might be different from people with different budget concerns, right? When you pay $80 for a game, you may want a game that you're going to be playing for a while. But then at that point, you can play a game for 500 hours for free if you're playing Fortnite.
Yeah.
So what is the value
true.
proposition you're making there when you're as a creative, right?
Yeah.
Would I rather spend the amount of time making 50 variations on a theme or taking 13 different experiences and curating them and making that interesting? And I feel Ubisoft has started going in that direction, because I'm going to show you now the map for Far Cry 5.
Yeah.
It looks similar, right, to what you saw in Assassin's Creed Unity. There's a ton of icons on this map, but the way they started doling stuff out in Far Cry 5 is different. It became more about what you heard from people on the street, you know? And they say like, oh, there is this guy who before the cult came, he set up this bunker in this place, but you know, he's kind of a crazy person. And then you go and check it out, and indeed there's a bulk here, but like there's riddles and there's traps, and you have to figure out how to get in there. And they did a pretty intelligent job in making these prepper stashes. There's only 10 of them or so, but they all feel distinct and different when you come across them. That it creates content that you want to engage with, right? Because it's different and it's remixing the elements they're already used to. The problem is that then they also put a bunch of collectibles and stuff that you're just taking off boxes, right? It got to that point where your map didn't fill up with that stuff, but you could buy maps and make it fill up. And I just didn't do that because why? You know?
So for me, not the problem, but what I've seen with open world games in general that makes me not want to play them, say if I were to play a more linear game, is when I play a linear game, say I only have 20 hours, which is kind of a typical time frame for a linear game. Like The Last of Us was like around 20 hours or so, right?
I'd say that's even more exceptional.
Yeah.
Like to have a linear game be 20 hours.
Yeah, they might be a bit shorter. But the thing is, when I play those linear games, I play them so that I have a very curated experience. All the way, and there's a lot of things when I say curated. I mean, like, the angle that you just showed in Valhalla, like, it's difficult to get that angle because you can't predict where the character is going to appear from, right? So you have to have a lot of game design that's very subtle that guides the player into these vistas or something without being too obvious and saying, hey, there's a checkpoint here and you have to go here and then you see this vista. So, like, when you play a single player game, though, like, they have full control over everything. And I really appreciate being taken through an adventure. It's like the difference between me watching a movie and then watching, say, a live stream of someone. Like, I might really enjoy the live stream because it's, you know, it's spontaneous and you never know what you're going to expect, and it's real, right? It feels a lot more real. That's something about, like, open worlds, that you can stumble upon things. You can start exploring a cave and then revealing the story that's behind the cave that you weren't really expecting, and because you know the game didn't tell you to go there, you feel like you own it more because you decided to go there. But at the same time, like, you don't get the crazy storylines and really high peak emotions that you can get in, like, a game like The Last of Us, where they've decided they're going to show you this character's perspective because they know it's going to make you feel a certain way when they jump to this character's perspective, right?
I'm not sure I completely agree with that, though, because we have open world games that have definitely shown exactly that, like Red Dead Redemption 2, which I feel is a failure of game design, but it definitely does evoke an emotional resonance with the viewer.
What I'm saying is, not that you're incorrect, because you are correct. There are examples of games that can do that in open world. The trade-off is that they're losing part of the trade-off of why they decided to make an open world game with content like that.
Yes.
Is that you have to manually curate all of it now.
Yes.
And part of what made a game like Breath of the Wild amazing, in so many people's opinion, is that they felt there's so many areas that felt that they had that hand feel touch to it, but it was a very massively open world game, right?
And that's so sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying that's a sign of what Nintendo always does, is that Nintendo has always produced these amazing single player, very crafted experiences, but they somehow translated that to Breath of the Wild, and I think that's why this game is kind of one of the beacons of one of the best types of open world games, right? I think that's the key, is like, how do you first lay out this giant canvas of content that you want to give your players, but then how do you go back in there and hand touch every single one of them so it feels like each one is worth it to go to, you know?
I almost feel like Breath of the Wild is sort of almost an unfair comparison because of how much time that game had in development and the care that went into it. Because you look at it in terms of formula, it still follows a similar formula to Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, in that when you look at it, there is only a handful of activities. You're doing shrines, you're doing main quests, you're doing side quests, and the smallest element is the Korok seeds.
Yeah.
But in each of those are unique enough in their layout. Like the Korok seeds are fantastic because you always get the feeling that one's nearby, just the way you're investigating the environment. Like, wait, those 3 rocks are arranged in a very specific way. What if I put this other rock here and then, you found me?
Yeah.
Um,
It's almost like an addiction that it trains you to, and you're like, oh, I keep wanting to look for things because I might get this
Yeah.
Korok seed.
and,
Yeah.
and this is sort of the but they still managed to put an overwhelming amount of content like that. But at the end of the day, what I really want from open world games is that sort of environmental communication without, say, you feeling the need to complete everything, and still getting benefit out of it, but something more like The Witness, which was that puzzle game by Jonathan Blow's company. And it is very focused on you looking at your environment, spending time in your environment, and following along clues to be able to solve puzzles. And the puzzles all use the same sort of existing systems and sort of core mechanics.
Yeah.
But the way you approach them and the environments you approach them dictate what you're doing in that specific area. And there's sort of that hand-touched element to it. And this is something that I'm hoping Ghost of Tsushima does, because that's another game that is...
That's right.
It's very clearly influenced by Breath of the Wild, at least to me, in that look how ridiculous this is, Ken. They make all the particles in the game, the wind, the leaves and stuff, all slowly drift in the direction of your objective that you have marked on your map.
Oh,
and then you can press a button, and then there's a gust of wind that more directly will point you in that direction. But
Wow.
always throughout the entire time you're spending in that game, there are subtle hints that are guiding you into it.
Oh, that's
And
that's
side
actually really
areas,
cool.
yeah, and side areas are all dictated by birds flying overhead, or like a fox darts out and starts heading towards a shrine, and those are indication to the player that, hey, there's something here that you can go into.
Yeah.
The downside is I haven't played the game, so I don't want to say what I think about
Soon.
it. But the reviews that people are saying is that once you actually do get to those locations, it is very standard open world design in that there is only slight variations on them, and they're not
I
very
see.
different, right?
That's gonna be a little sad if that's the case.
But that's the way that open world games are generally designed, because they have to hit this quota of content that you're gonna hit. And I would have been fine. I would have been more than fine if all the collectibles in Far Cry 5 were just outposts and those prepper stashes, and it was a smaller game, you know?
Yeah.
And even if they diversified the outposts even more. For example, my hopes for Far Cry 6, right? Because they have to make something different, and they are trying to make something different. And my hope is, once we get to Far Cry 6, is that the learnings that they will take from this is having less emphasis on doing a checklist on the map, making diegetic forms like Ghost of Tsushima does to inform you of, hey, there is content here, and then curating that content, even if there is not a lot of it that's different, that you will go there and you will have an experience that you weren't expecting, right? As soon as you make a collectible or something like that an expected result, you are immediately incurring frustration on behalf of the player, because they are not immediately finding what they came there to do, and they know they have 90 more to go through.
Yeah, I feel like part of the problem with the Assassin's Creed games, and a lot of games just in general, is I think there's an over reliance on UI. I think it's because UX, which is user experience, it's a relatively new discipline in the games industry that's popped up maybe like 5 to 6 years ago, and the whole idea of it is that the idea is that there are methods you can guide your player through what you need them to do, and that's the user experience flow. UI is a very obvious band-aid to say, hey, you should go here. And I think the more you use UI, especially in a game like an open world game where the point is that you want the player to discover it themselves, if you give them a UI, it's a band-aid, but it takes away some of that element that you're trying to add
The exploration.
in. You're giving
the
them
curiosity,
the answer.
right?
You're giving them the answer. It's like the Professor Layton game where you're solving puzzles and riddles, but you're always getting the answer to the riddle like 10 seconds, and you don't even get a chance to figure it out yourself. That's what it kind of feels like. And I think the evolution, and a part of why Breath of the Wild was great is, Nintendo released a few videos that they had a whole ideology behind how they
did the landscaping. In terms of shapes that they were going to use to help direct the players, they had these types of blocks of shapes that they used in their world editor, and that's how they would plan for the vistas that would show up, and that's how they plan for like more chances of the player going up to this cliff and seeing this like great beautiful environment. And I'm not sure if you saw any of this, but their editor system, their map editor was great. They allowed anyone to edit the map together, like live. There's not one map that anyone's editing, and people can put notes on the environment to talk to other game designers, saying like this area is gonna be like a dungeon, or this area needs to like look really epic or something, or this is a vista type area that we're gonna try to like focus all the elements around. And so that's like a behind the scenes kind of like a subtle way to tell the player what to do. Is a lot harder than a straight up UI, right?
Yes.
And I think that
when you make a game that's so massive, like Far Cry, that has so many studios touching it, communicating that, it becomes hard. Yeah. So I'm extremely sympathetic to anyone that has that challenge to make with such a large team. And the fundamental that I need to say is that I do enjoy these games, and I do think they're extraordinarily well crafted.
Yeah.
I just am getting to the point where as a player I can't get excited for them, even though I have so much respect for all the developers that make these sort of games and
what do you
encourage
think
these
it
challenges.
Is? What is it that you think of when you think of playing an open world game that makes you not want to play it? Is it the hours?
It's the time investment and the fact that I don't feel I'm going to be rewarded for the time I put into it.
Yeah.
Right? When I play open world games right now, I don't go seeking out all the collectibles because I don't feel it's worth it to me in the long run. I know they're there to pad out the hour count. I do the main story missions, and I hit the side missions that I find interesting, and then I have to move on to something else. But I imagine a world where and I feel my result coming away from that game is lessened because not enough time and resources can be put towards making the big moments in that game pay off.
I wonder if there's something else as well, is that the mini mechanics that they're trying to get you to do, like say in Assassin's Creed, you're constantly unlocking towers to reveal larger fast travel zones, right? Like when you unlock a tower, you might get that bit of reward for unlocking it right then and there, but there's almost no built upon reward, like say you do a story element, because now you progress the story and there's like this thing that you've been building on. Whereas when you unlock something, or unlock a tower, or get like an achievement or like a secret, there's no precursor that's built upon it. There's nothing for me to be like, it's not like a storyline quest arc that has characters that move along and you feel like you've made progress. It just feels like you're doing something that doesn't have any effect on any noticeable effect on the game further besides what it just did right now, right? Like
it might even advance like skill trees or the way your eagle works, like in AC Odyssey. But you're absolutely right. It's purely a game mechanic, not an immersion mechanic, and it's almost completely in the service of building out that map. Whereas when you climb any sort of structure, like the Sheikah shrines, not the Sheikah shrines, the towers in Breath of the Wild. You do expand the map, but most importantly is you had a challenge to climb that tower, and it taught you something about the world. There are some that are covered in bramble, and you learn, I can burn these. There are some that have wind gusts that you need to catch also by burning. There are some that are covered in ice that you also need. Wow, a lot of them actually use fire, I'm realizing.
Well, it's essentially that it requires a mechanic that you're going to learn.
That you're going to learn intuitively, right? Or otherwise you're not going to climb the tower. And then it fills out your map, but then everything else, you're actively engaged in marking what is interesting to you. Again, this is reinforcing player choice. When you uncover a map in Assassin's Creed or Far Cry, or the old Far Cry's, because they removed that in Far Cry 5, you are not getting player choice in what you unlock. You are being told you can go here, here, and here. This is what's important. You choose which one you want to go to. You have full knowledge. That curiosity and exploration is lost, which is a shame because, oh my god, I love so much of how Assassin's Creed Odyssey looks, and I love so much of the quests that you uncover, and they do reveal it organically to you in certain situations. You hear about tales and stuff from people, and you go and investigate, and it's cool and it's awesome. But there is so much of it, it's hard to know what's good. And they're lucky enough not lucky enough, they're talented enough that they made a lot of that stuff incredibly compelling, but it does feel artificial in a sort of way.
I'll tell you one thing that I did for Shadow of Mordor. Do you remember that game? That's essentially Assassin's Creed Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
They have that Nemesis system, which I freaking loved. It's hilarious. Different orcs that would come up with different characteristics. But one of the things that I found that was kind of throwing me off from enjoying the game was you would know exactly where they are almost all the time as soon as you get onto the map. And then I ended up playing a few sessions where I told myself that I would just look through the map myself, which is way slower, but it feels so much more interesting when you actually spot them and you see them coming up and you're like, that motherfucker is right there.
Yeah. Or he ambushes you and you did not know he was nearby, and then he's like, you motherfucker.
Yes, exactly. Or his buddy shows up and it's another nemesis that you were looking for.
Yeah.
Oh, like those are the moments that came up during that game that were spontaneous, which made me feel like, wow, this is why I'm playing this kind of game.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that that's a part of what they need to do is they need to pull back on giving people things for free too much, specifically information. Like for a game that is about exploration and you give them too much information about where to explore, it kind of defeats a bit of the purpose of what the game was. Right?
Yeah. And I know they're trying, because there is that even in Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, there's that. I don't know if it's called immersion mode or what have you. But it's a mode where they don't put markers on the map. They say it's the west side of the province and it's here and it's there and whatever. The main problem I have with that is that I am still
it's too hard.
I am still looking at a map. You know, I'm just like, well, it's to the east. I'm like, okay, well, it's over here on the map. I guess I'm gonna go there. Whereas I feel Ghost of Tsushima, if I wish it nailed it on the content end, but it sounds like it doesn't. That is the kind of stuff that I want. It is you use the environment, use the world to trigger something in the player, that curiosity in the player, which everyone has, and like the games that tap into that, Outer Wilds, Breath of the Wild, they tap into player curiosity. They tap into Minecraft. They tap into the what ifs and what if I, and then reward that.
Well, I think it's a whole genre. Like I think it's something that's so hard that it's easy for us to take it for granted.
Yes.
But if you look at the movie genre, there's a whole category called cinematography that's all designed around directing a person's eye on the screen, and that's that's a very set like frame that you're in, and there's so much complexity and so many possible solutions that go into this kind of player direction or audience direction. And games are even more advanced, that I think it's an even harder aspect to do, because you have to go so much into psychology and players' play styles and experiences. But I do think that's clearly the next evolution in most of these games right now. Is you got to stop. You can't keep hand holding so much. And I think people are, I would say maybe early PS3 days, and then onwards was the first kind of era of the overly handheld UI UX genres, where they would give you like way too many tutorials, blah blah blah, about how to play, how to do this, how to do that. And I think the industry got into a phase where it's like, well, we don't want anyone to miss our content because we spent so much time making it, and so how do we guarantee that they see the content? And then you go all the way to the point where you get Resident Evil 6, I believe, where they would physically force your camera to look at a vista and not allow you to turn, which is the worst experience in my life. I hated that so much. But it's like it's essentially you're saying you're going to give up the fact that this is a game so that you can try to get this element that's in movies, but you'll never be as successful in movies as they are in movies, so why try, right? And so then you get, I would say, some of the more modern day games, and the Nintendo in general is very good at this, is directing users where they want you to go without
specifically saying, although they always add like a ton of UI as well. But like Breath of the Wild and stuff like that, or a game like Mirror's Edge was really got a lot of accolades back in the day for simply having the color red everywhere you need to go, right? And it was such the basic
all the
concept, but it worked.
grabbable objects, which now we're starting to criticize games for doing that.
But-
like Uncharted, say, well, I can clearly climb these ledges.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
reached a point where we're starting to criticize this sort of development, and I
Yeah.
think that's rightfully
it's an
slow.
evolution. It's an evolution, right?
Yeah, and definitely like we reached a point where we can do that more organically, right? We have the techniques to do that with framing and just focusing players' attention by narrowing what there is to focus on, right?
I think we'll see that in the open world genre too. Like you were talking before, Assassin's Creed 1 was honestly good enough for being the first game that did that kind of open world attempt, right? And they kept building upon it. And then we'll always be judging the games about whether they evolve that genre enough, right? And hopefully the next Assassin's Creed deals with some of the issues that Far Cry had before, and AC5 and AC Unity and stuff had.
Yeah,
it's hard to say like what the right answer is because there's so many possible solutions, but I hope they evolve.
I that's why I always say like I will always show up for these games and try them out, because I am curious about what people are going to try to solve them, and stuff like Far Cry 5 I think was a half step in terms of the content, right? In making it more unique, more distinct, but it still stumbled in how it delivered it to you. That stuff wasn't really communicated in the world. It didn't draw your eye the way Breath of the Wild did. You had to talk to someone and get a marker on your map in order to suss it out.
Far Cry 5 felt like it was emphasizing its storyline moments the most, right?
Oh my god, no, absolutely. They would interrupt you so you would be out in the wild having fun, and then they would say, you'll roll up and say, hit him with that bliss bullet, and then you'd wake up, and then there was a guy like spitting exposition at you. And you had to go through an escape sequence. It was the worst for that. And I'm hoping Far Cry 6 is that next step that it needs to. Getting rid of the towers was a great first step. I don't think putting the markers on our map was good. I think if they spend a lot of time making that map smaller but have more distinct points that you can see from a distance, what is good, what is to explore.
You know what game I think doesn't get enough credit? Probably does get enough credit, but it has tons of bugs. Is the Fallout 3 and New Vegas series. I think
like it's so much a lot of credit.
Yeah, was it?
I think it's a lot of credit.
That's a lot of credit, obviously. Well, like they still hold up nowadays. Just the exploring part. The exploring part was so fun because, you have it's so simple. You just have a looting mechanic where you're looking for supplies and money, which drives most people's standard exploration already, right? They had a smaller map for most of their maps, right? They were able to guide you into a single player route early on, even though you had access to the world map quite early on. Most people were able to find out what the next proper steps were to go to the open world. And then throughout the entire game, like you could wander off and then find like you can find a cavern full of a society full of children that are all like running each other and stuff, right?
And they're trying to excommunicate the teen because he's too old.
He's too old.
I remember that.
Yeah, like that stuff is great. Or you find like a vault and there's some creepy history about the vault and they're doing strange experiments. Like they did a really good job.
Yeah.
And I don't remember them ever overly marking my map. In fact, I remember myself marking the map most of the time.
Yeah. I think that's a very good call. And it's interesting that you mentioned the looting mechanic, because that definitely is sort of the driving reward for a lot of these places why they want people to explore, is that they want to get loot, which is like either currency or a new weapon or something like that. But an interesting thing that I heard before from Alex Beecham, who was one of the creators on Outer Wilds, is the reason why you have no inventory or any sort of items or anything in that game. Did I say Outer Worlds or did I say Outer Wilds? Outer Wilds is the one I meant.
yeah, Outer Wilds. Yeah.
The reason why you don't have any of the sort of stuff in that game is he said that they wanted to make a game that is purely driven by curiosity, and I thought that is a very powerful argument. Because
it's a very powerful argument.
You're forced to, like, when you consider progression in that game, it's not I want to explore to get more powerful. It's like, nah, dog, you are exploring because literally that is the game. Mm-hmm. It is the most honest version of exploration. It's you want to there goes my light. It's you want to figure out what is happening in this world. Why is there a time loop? And you're slowly peeling back mystery after mystery. And the only reason you're doing that is curiosity. And I want that curiosity to embody these games more. I want you to be curious as you're exploring an open world, and that is a difficult thing to do when you're juggling so many different other mechanics. Outer Wilds was able to do it because it's small and constrained. Yeah. But Breath of the Wild is an example where that can work and you can get a very polished game out of it. Now I want us to democratize that, and that's the sort of the challenges that as a designer I really would like to dig into at some point in my career. I really want to drive the emotion of exploration and discovery. I want people to go on hikes that they did not know were so rewarding and emotional for them.
I do think that, just to pull on your statement where you said, like, it's more honest. I do think it's more honest, that kind of exploration, but I also think it's incredibly hard. Like, incredibly hard to get a random player to want to explore where the rewards are just figuring out more about your world. Like, the onus then becomes so much on your world. Your world has to be so interesting or fascinating that it's compelling enough. Yeah. Whereas I do think that I don't have any problems augmenting that need with some sort of gameplay mechanic, because that's the RPG ideal as a whole, right? Like the whole genre of turn-based RPGs, like turn-based fighting, is extremely boring, but if you add the looting and items and stuff, becomes super interesting, right? And so I like the idea of having something, but I do think that there's you can't be so reliant on the RPG mechanic, because that's so sterile and not fun necessarily.
I want to be clear on that as well, because you do mention it. I don't want these bigger open world games to have the exploration be the only reward for it, but I want to not. This is where it gets difficult again. Yeah. Right? I want to not know what it is I'm going to find, right? Like, I go back to this image here of Valhalla, right? Yeah. I don't know what's in the castle, but I know there's something there. Yeah. I want to go there. I want to have the challenge of discovering how to get there. I want to have the challenge of fighting whatever is in there. And I want to find something that I wasn't expecting as a reward, right? I want to have the experience where I'm not going to a shopping mall, right? And getting the exact same thing. I don't want to look on my map and say, well, if I go here, I'll get a new weapon. I better go do that. And then have
or I was going to say, my experience is like going to this thing and being amazed the first time, and then realizing there's like 20 more of these exact same buildings.
That's the thing, right? It's if I go and do a thing once and it's exciting, I go do it again, and if I have to do the same sort of process, it's not exciting. Breath of the Wild towers, just like 9 of them, and you climb them all in different ways, and they feel refreshing and unique. Yeah, I want that same sort of reaction to the rewards, and and that's a hard thing, and that's where I hear where Ghost of Tsushima stump again. I need to play this game in order to tell about it. So
we're gonna find out. Is that gonna be your next game review?
I'll definitely.
I'm actually very curious. I'm very curious about it.
But I do hear that their problem is with the rewards, right? They got all these games have the pieces of an amazing game, but they're all in different games. Ghost of Tsushima has the way you navigate the world without any UI, and you're getting there. But once you get there, you're doing the same thing, and you're getting rewards that don't feel worth it.
That's sad.
All the good rewards are behind like the limited special like side quests and mythical quests that are in that game apparently. Oh, okay. The actual exploration of that world doesn't feel very rewarding is the main complaint that I heard about it.
Ooh,
and it feels very rote. Yeah. And eventually it does populate your map, and then you're just checking boxes.
Common open world problem.
But the way you navigate through that world sounds amazing. And I hope that really triggers that sort of that need to explore that's in me.
Or hypothetically, I want to also throw out that these games can just not do open world. Because I would say that you need to do it well or don't do it.
Or do it in a limited sense.
Yeah, it's...
You don't need to make the biggest world. You don't need to make the biggest world.
Yeah. Look at Zelda, we were talking about Ocarina of Time. That was only, that was less than half of the game is open world. Probably 25% of that game was open world, but it added so much flavor and uniqueness to that particular... that changed the Zelda franchise forever. Every game after that had an open world. Every game, right? So that's how important that aspect was. But
I feel that's always been their staple, even Link to the Past.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I would say that idea was even less fleshed out until later on.
Yeah,
but
I guess the side elements, right? Having characters who will tell you about something, and then you go and explore that part, and then there's something there. It definitely was more fleshed out in Ocarina. There's a lot of content in Ocarina that is surprisingly cinematic and important to the items you can acquire that will, bottles. Getting bottles in that game changes everything.
One thing that I would love to do at one point is Ocarina of Time and a lot of Zelda games feel very cinematic. Even though they're very basic looking games, but I wanted to point out the camera work was so much better in those games, even for the moments where they didn't for the moments where they decided to cut away, the way that they framed everything and the music they generated was actually really top tier. Whereas you look at some of the games nowadays, or even, I hate to keep poking fun of that Devolver Direct, is they use very basic camera layouts. And people underestimate the power of cinematography. If you're trying to do a movie moment, the importance of your camera can't be stated enough. We work on Gears of War, and one of the biggest innovations in thinking Gears of War 6 was the camera work that they used.
Gears of War 6?
Gears of War, sorry, Gears 5. Sorry, my bad. I don't know Gears of War 6. I'm talking about Assassin's Creed 6. That's but Gears, for the latest Gears was the change in camera that they used for all the cinematic scenes. It was, and God of War too. All these games that you think of that are super cinematic, there's a lot of hidden element in just how they showed the camera that really changed the feel of the game. It's kind of a bit of a sidetrack, but yeah.
All right. Well, that's enough about open world games. We're starting to sprawl a little bit, just like an open world game.
Yeah. We're spreading a little thin, talking about.
So we've been at this for 2 hours. Normally we were gonna do our little free time, but what do you say we call it?
Yeah, I think we're good. Caught all the content. I think that next week we're gonna look at Ghost of Tsushima from you, possibly.
Yeah, I'll be playing it unless something else comes up. It sounds like it's a long game, between 25 to 50 hours. What are you planning to be playing?
I downloaded Divinity Original Sin 2.
Oh, did you play the first one?
Yeah, I did. I played the first one. I liked it a lot. I had a lot of UI complaints, which they seem to have fixed in the second one.
Nice.
Which I'm very happy about.
There are so many CRPGs that I would love to play, like Pillars of Eternity.
I played Pillars. I think Divinity is better than Pillars, in my opinion.
It did come after.
I think Divinity plays smoother. The writing is a little bit better. And man, the mods are so good. They're so good in Divinity Original Sin 2. There's mods for everything. People made full classes because it's just D&D, and it's so much fun. I love it. I love the mods. It's so good.
Yeah, I'll play those games one day eventually.
I love them because it just reminds me of reading Lord of the Rings. It's
I like those worlds. I like those stories.
The voice acting is actually really, really good. I think that's one of the hardest. And like I said, the writing is so important, and the voice acting is so important. And they nailed those things that I'm having.
You know what it is? I'm just afraid to start them. I'm afraid to start them because I know they're long and they're difficult. And I'm afraid I'm gonna stop.
Very difficult. Divinity is. Strangely enough, one of the hardest turn-based RPGs as well. If you play on the hard mode, which I am, and I kind of regret it sometimes because it's a little too hard.
Yeah, even the normal mode is hard in that game. I heard. I did start Divinity 1, and then I restarted because I realized I made my character wrong. And then
did that,
and
like,
then
8 times.
I caught up to where I was before, which wasn't that far in, which was like just an hour in, and then I stopped and I'm like,
Divinity, by the
This is a
way, Divinity
lot.
1, it was very, very difficult for a casual player to play.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't give you almost any hints as to what to do early on, and they didn't even have a proper quest tracker in terms of like, the quest tracker is literally a wall of text without spaces.
See, but this is curiosity-driven design. I should like this.
Yeah? Question mark? It's that well, this is the thing that they did in Skyrim and all of the other, like, a lot of other RPGs, is that they had these novels that they would put around the world, and they had tons of lore in it. But dude, I'm not gonna read a 50-page novel inside a game that I'm playing right now.
Squinting at your monitor, just like.
Yeah.
And then Vianderfell went all the way to the Northernland.
And then what? Where am I supposed to go? Where am I going? What is going on here?
I'll tell you one thing I did, like, another thing for Fallout is I love that they give you the audio tracks instead, and you can just play them like as you're
Listening-
and BioShock as well. Yeah, you can just play them
Listening
as
to
you're
your post-apocalypse doomsday podcast while you're roaming the wasteland.
It's great. And I remember they had like the post-apocalypse radio station too. That was a part of a storyline.
Three
quest you
dog.
could- Yeah. So that's all I'm playing right now. That's pretty much it.
Cool. Well, let's reconvene at the same time next week then.
All right. Actually, possibly Wednesday or Monday next week. I think I might have a scheduling conflict, but
Right, you're doing
I'll
your
let you know.
your hacker stuff.
my hack
Little
stuff.
furious stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So everyone, thank you for watching. Send us mails if you got them. Thank you, Adrian Challenge, for the music. Everyone else, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And we'll see you next time beyond the pixel.